I think you were out in LA for a party for the show you did the soundtrack for, right? The Seth Rogen show, The Studio. How was that?
It was great. I mean, Apple organized a bunch of events because it has 23 nominations, the most nominations junior comedy has ever gotten. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, I did a few interviews. Um, what did I do the second day? Oh yeah, it was a panel with all the composers that are nominated, um, with Severance, Black Mirror, Andor, The Penguin, and I had never, you know, film scoring and TV scoring is a very lonely endeavor. You're just in your house by yourself doing your thing in your studio, and then you send the stuff, and there's a million things happening over there, and everybody's usually working side by side, and you're the only one that is kind of in another country. Basically, I am in Spain, so yeah, it's hard to feel like you're part of the team, sometimes. But these kinds of events kind of make it a little bit more real. And maybe a month and a half ago, I was also in LA, and I got to meet the whole cast, and I got to finally meet Seth and Evan Goldberg, were the creators and the directors, Bryan Cranston, the whole shebang. And it was nice finally because they don't know me. I mean, only Seth and Evan have seen me through what platform are we on? Zoom.
Zoom?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a couple of Zoom meetings, and that was it. And when I saw them a month and a half ago in this huge event, but they were surrounded by, hordes of people. I came in and introduced myself, and they were like, "Oh, finally, dude, you're real. You're just not a Zoom character," which was nice. So yeah, it's an interesting feeling to be a part of something so big, but to be so far removed in a way. But it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. It's one of those series that everything comes together, and you realize when everything comes together and something's successful, you realize how hard it is for things to come together and for things to be successful. Because as you can see, every time you open Netflix or every time you open Apple TV or HBO, whatever your favorite platform is just an insane amount of content. And most of it just kind of stays here. They go like here, and then all of a sudden, boom, one explodes, and it's great to finally be a part of one that explodes, because I have done a lot of them, a lot of TV series that just are good. Some are really good, but wrong platform, wrong network. Some are not that great. Some look great on paper, and then when you finally see the end result, you're like, it's not happening. It's just very hard for everything to come together, and I'm just so lucky to be a part of something where that's the case.
Well, that's amazing. Working backwards, how did this project come about? How did they come to be on your doorstep, and how did you choose this show as something to work on?
Well, my agent who was in LA told me, I've heard rumors that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg are temping their new series with the stuff from Birdman. So I was like, okay, I hope that means that at some point I'm gonna get a call. Somebody told me that they were actually considering licensing the music from Birdman to put on the show. I'm glad they didn't, because also that's way more expensive than to hire the actual composer, which is crazy. But yeah, I mean, they got me a meeting with them over Zoom, and I was on tour somewhere, and it was last year, because it was the 10th year anniversary of Birdman. So I was doing a bunch of shows all over the States and in Europe. And we got in a Zoom meeting, and the first thing they told me when they sat down was like, "Man, want to tell you, Birdman is one of our favorite movies and soundtracks and stuff. And this show has a lot of influence from Birdman, the way it's shot, the rhythm, and we just think, w what we've been doing with the soundtrack already works. But we want to know if you're also up for doing other things, because that's one of the cruxes of Birdman, that I'm the drum guy, right? So if you want drums, I'm the guy, but if you want something else, they're going to call somebody else. So it's been an uphill battle, uh, constant uphill battle to show my range, to show that I can do all the kinds of stuff. I assure them I went to classical school. I, studied classical piano. I play a bunch of different instruments, and I send them um, samples of other scores I've done. And then at one point, Seth just said, "Well, I'm sold," and then he did his Seth laugh, and that was it. And then we started working on it. And it was cool because they gave me a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. They said, whenever you hear something, even if there's no temp, just don't pay attention to the temp anymore, to the placeholders. Just do whatever you think it is, right? And we kind of hit it off right off the bat, and I got a very nice separate email from both of them saying everything you're doing works, everything's sounding great, and everything is just feeling great. So you just keep doing it. So it's been one of those good experiences versus some other experiences I've had where they're micromanaging, and they're kind of making you do things that are not exactly in your wheelhouse. They shouldn't have called you for that in a way, but it's too late, and so on and so forth. So it's been a fortunate situation, and a fun one too.
Amazing. When you project ahead with your goals, how are you envisioning film scoring intermingling with your drum stuff and your tours, and with maybe your creative stuff that's more directly related to performing drums live?
It's a good question, because I never know when something's going to come up. So usually my first priority is to play, and either with my band, or I have a bunch of different collaborated projects right now that are a lot of fun, like the one with Bella Fleck and Mark Castaneda, the one with Michael League and Pedrito Martinez. There's another one coming up with Ben Wendell. So, that's the first thing that I want to do. I want to go out and play all this music. It's always fun. It's always challenging. It's always brutal to be on the road, but uh, you cannot complain too much about doing the thing that you really want to do. So it's always a privilege, of course, to do it. But then all of a sudden, uh, one of these series appears. Now I know that the second season is coming for the studio, so I can plan ahead a little better. I know that's coming next year at some point, so then I can plan a little better. But that's the hardest part, just the intermingling between the touring and the having to be home to do it. Because maybe if I was a composer that based most of his stuff on keyboards, then I could bring a keyboard on the road and do it like that. But I have to be home in order to play the drums, and I have my drum set up, and they're always mic, and they always sound great. So what happened this time around, and right before the studio was doing another series, which was a British series called Stags, which was 6 episodes, and it was very demanding, a lot of music. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the music. Unfortunately, the series, I don't know if it should have. I feel like it should have come, to a little higher level than it did. And also, one thing that really frustrates me is when the music is too low. And I feel like in this occasion, I started watching it. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're mixing the music so low in scenes that there's almost nothing going on except the music. So that can be very frustrating. But the hardest thing was to be doing that and then touring, and then, okay, I'm going to be gone for so many days or so many weeks. So how many cues do I need to do per day in order to fill my quota of cues before I leave? And then how many do I need to do when I come back for a week and a half? So it took a lot of organization. And every time I would come home, it would be very stressful. Usually coming home is the release from the road. No, this was worse than being on the road, because I had to do like 14, 15 hours sometimes just to get it done. But you know, I can't complain. It's a lot of fun.
Do you feel like going forward, you're going to be more choosy with film scoring projects with the aim of avoiding that stressful feeling when you get home? Or do you feel like that's just part of it and you have to take the bad with the good?
I think that's part of it. And also, unfortunately, as a jazz musician, the royalty situation with the platforms, you know, Spotify, Apple Music, blah, 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 is so non-existent for us, that when you get one of these gigs where it's a good series that is, you know, widely seen, the royalties are significant. You know, at least you feel them, you know, versus, you know, just a couple of $100 every, you know, 3 months with the stuff that you put out on platforms. It's just very, very meager. So this makes it feel like, okay, it's definitely worth it in the long run to do this kind of stuff just for that reason. And also, of course, sometimes if you want to stay home more, then you're working your ass off, but at least you're home, you're not traveling. It's a different situation. So ideally, I would like to establish myself more in that world and just be able to do exactly what I want to do. I mean, I guess it's what we all strive for, but it's very hard to get there. You know, especially if what they're offering you is cool. You know, if it's a dud, it's very easy to say no to things. Same thing with touring. But, you know, luckily, I'm you know, at a point in my career where the things that gets offered to me is like, oh yeah, I would love to do that. So you know, it's a balancing act.
It's interesting because, backing up again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Birdman is the thing that put you on the map to the degree where non-drummers and non-jazz fans knew your name. Like, all of a sudden I'd be listening to podcasts and I would hear your name dropped. I would be like, I've been listening to this guy for like 15 years before this. But I'm curious what that was like for you and how much film scoring you'd done before then. Or was that just kind of a serendipitous project that found you?
It was a total accident. I never looked for any film scoring gigs. I was not interested. I love film. I grew up watching a lot of films because my mom, she was a film critic. She was a supervisor in the National Film Archive. I mean, she was very involved with cinema. So I was also, you know, just sipping up everything that was coming my way. And also my grandfather was an incredibly famous film, TV, and theater actor. So, you know, I was around that all the time, but you know, I was doing my thing. I was first rock drumming, then fusion drumming, then Latin jazz drumming, then jazz drumming. And then all of a sudden, this opportunity came because Alejandro González Iñárritu, the director of Birdman, came to one of the Pat Metheny shows back in 2005. And this is, it gets very serendipitous, like you said, because when I was in Mexico City in my teens, I was listening to a radio station that, in my opinion, played the hippest music in Mexico back then. And Alejandro González was one of the DJs. And thanks to him, I heard the Pat Metheny group for the first time. He played it on a nightly show they used to have called Magic Nights. And I heard that. I was like, wow, what is that? That's super cool. But I was in my Rush and the Police and Led Zeppelin phase. So it was very foreign to me, but I liked it. And then I started finding more about it. And then fast forward many, many years, I ended up getting the gig with the Pat Metheny group. Alejandro came to see us in LA, and he had already done Amores Perros and 21 Grams. And then after the show, there was an after party, and I met him, but I didn't recognize him. So I kept talking to him for a while, and I was kind of annoyed, a little bit annoyed, because I was trying to get to my dressing room to change, and he kind of intercepted me before I was able to go. And I was like, I was sweaty, and I was like, oh man, okay, yeah, sure. How you doing, man? And I, without realizing who I was talking to, and then at the end, I asked him, what do you do? And he said films and commercials. And but I thought, LA, everybody directs films and commercials. And then I asked, well, anything I would have seen, and not expecting much in return. And then he said, well, I did this thing, Amores Perros on 21 grams. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just apologized. Gave him a big hug, told him I was a big fan. And that was that. We stayed in touch for a few years. But then, I don't know, that was 2005. So like 8 years later, something like that, he calls me and was like, I'm thinking of, doing this film. Is going to be a dark comedy. Comedy and rhythm go together. I remember you from that night, and would you want to give it a shot? I was like, hell yeah. And so yeah, that was the thing that opened the door. And I was in a film festival with Alan Silvestri, who was like, an incredible film composer, all the Forrest Gump, countless Back to the Future. And I was very, very insecure at the moment. I had total imposter syndrome. I was getting all these awards for Birdman. I was like, man, I just improvised, that's all I did. And he told me, I remember he told me, you didn't open the door. You like blew up a side of the building. So just take advantage of it. And, I thought for a while that, okay, it was a fun ride, but that's it. And then I started getting different calls because so many people love that film. And, it's been the gift that keeps on giving, thankfully.
Yeah. So I'm interested in changing gears to the drum thing a little bit, but maybe we work in reverse on this subject as well. Take me inside what you're working on these days when you're at home and not working on other people's music. I saw an Instagram story with you working on some triplet flow, and I was like, oh, that's the stuff. But yeah, what are you practicing these days when you're able to just work on drums?
When I practice, because that was one of the things, for example, when I did the studio, and then right before I did that other series called Stags, it was months and months of me playing for 2 minutes and then on the computer for 2 hours and then playing 5 seconds and then a computer for an hour. It was just like that. So I was not playing that much every day, and I didn't have time to practice. So when finally I was done with the series and I started getting more time to practice, one of the things that I really like doing is just playing music and then just playing along, not necessarily playing the parts, maybe playing against the parts, just kind of flowing. Like for example, I love Tom York's stuff because it has no drums. It has this weird drum machines and it's very super percussive, but there's no actual drums. So then it's a lot of fun for me to either imitate what's there or just play against it, do like a counterpoint thing to the percussion parts. And that's all done to a click. So then you're playing basically to a click, but you're playing music. And I like just to feel my body just kind of entering the flow. I like to feel the synapses of my brain just starting to connect again, where you're really feeling like, okay, everything's getting better. All the things you're trying to do, you're imagining, you're hearing, start actually coming alive. In the beginning, sometimes you feel like, oh, is it? Of course, you can do it because you've been doing it for so many years, but it's not quite as fluid as you want to be or you're used to being. And then I remember right after that, we started doing this trio with Bella Fleck and Edmar Castaneda, which is very demanding because both instruments, the harp and the banjo, are so percussive, of course. So it has to be very, very, very precise. And I also have a long open solo during the show, and then maybe I have like other 5 solos, and it's I don't usually give myself that many solos with my own band, and in this band I have way more solos than I have in my own band. So I'm usually tired by the end. And I remember we played in San Francisco, and I felt so bad, just like insecure, and I didn't feel like I was flowing, and I felt like I had to go to my very basics, my meat and potatoes, in order for me to survive the gig just in a decent way. So when I came home, I was just practicing every day, just playing, just flowing, trying different things. What I like to do is just find one thing. Like, for example, one of my missions was like, okay, I wanna lick where I cross my hands, that I can incorporate. I almost never do that ever. So, I've seen drummers doing it. Like, it looks cool, and it can bring some interesting orchestration uh, options when you do that. So I started doing stuff between the floor tom and the hi hat and the snare, and just trying to figure some stuff out. And I was like, oh, this is fun. It sounds cool. I mean, I don't like it for just to be gimmicky, but I like it when there's some interesting new vocabulary that comes out of that, and then displacing it and trying to do different things. Those kinds of things are I guess the how I practice nowadays, because it's not like I go, okay, I'm going to do my rudiments. I'm not doing that so much, which maybe I should, but I'm not. I'm not at that point right now.
It feels like with players I admire, everything has to answer to a musical imperative. So whether it's rudiments, whether it's coordination, whether it's ostinatos, it all kind of comes back to a musical goal. Like, if it weren't pertinent to something you were trying to create on the instrument, just kind of mindlessly windmilling rudiments wouldn't like get you in the zone, right?
Exactly. I feel like that's a huge difference. And when I do clinics, when I do master classes, when I do jazz camps, I always tell them that, you can practice everything at the same time. You can practice a standard, even if you're playing with no music. You can practice a standard, following the form in your head while you're singing the melody, filling in the spaces of the melody, then playing the melody, then playing against the melody, then playing a solo while you're thinking of the melody. And you have to think of dynamics, space, question and answer, call and response, what do you call it?
Theme and variation.
Tension and release, motivic development, all these things. You can do everything at the same time, and you can do it to a metronome, so you can be checking your time, but you can leave a lot of space with the metronome. Like, every 4 bars is when you hear the click, so that you're really working hard to keep the tempo. It's multitasking is what you have to do when you're playing a gig. You have to do everything at the same time. You have to play with the band. You have to listen to yourself. You have to listen to them. You have to come up with all these things. You have to keep this forward motion going. You have to play really loud. You have to play really soft. So, I always tell everybody, practice what you're going to do on the gig. Don't play a million different rudiments and super hard combinations that then later you get to the gig and you either can't use them, or they're not musical. They're not for the gig, And I see more and more of that happening with like the gospel chops people, which I see them and I'm like, man, this is incredible, but it's just 30-second notes or higher, and it's just different ways of orchestrating that. And it's very impressive and it's very cool, but they leave absolutely no space most of the time, like not one single 16 note or 30-second note of space. And to me, that's when it starts getting incredibly boring. So I always encourage drummers to make space their friend, to think about storytelling, to build characters as they're playing, either comping or soloing. I don't know. It's something that I'm fascinated with, and now that all that ties in with the film scoring thing and the TV scoring thing, because it's all about storytelling, right? How you can have a great script, but if you don't know how to tell it, then is not going to have the same effect. And it's the same thing with a solo. You know, how you started, how you ended, if you're going to, what kind of shape it's going to have, what kind of characters it's going to have, how much you're going to develop your characters versus your main characters versus your secondary characters. And I used to think that rock, jazz, classical music, name whatever style of music you want, it was all kind of separate. You know, what does classical music have to do with rock? You know, and what does jazz have to do with this or the thing? And then little by little, I started realizing that it's all the same thing. You know, Mozart was trying to do the same thing that the Beatles were trying to do, which is do a great melody, develop it, you know, then do a bridge. Mozart would do 5 movements, you know, of a symphony with that, but the Beatles would come up with hundreds of tunes that were catchy, and they all had the same similarities. You know, every kind of good music has the same characteristics: space, melody, motivic development. You know, all those things that we keep talking about.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about definitions and like what it means to be good as a drummer and good as a musician. And one kind of thought experiment that I was thinking about this previous week is like, how do we define good backwards in such a way that we consider both Ringo and Dennis Chambers good? In other words, like if we take these two drummers that are so vastly different in their styles and their approaches, what's the thing that they have in common that separates them from someone who's just beginning? In other words, what can we distill from them that someone who's going to put a lot of time and effort into practicing the instrument is going to be practicing toward? And I guess the closest thing I could come up with was just like reps toward something, reps towards some kind of musical imperative. And for Dennis, it's single strokes and linear fusion grooves. And for Ringo, it's playing compositionally and locking in with a band and like thinking of musical parts. But yeah, I'm curious how that paradigm lands with you.
To me, it's very simple. What's the mission? You know, when you're playing, what's the mission? Is your mission to show off and have everybody be in awe of you for 20 seconds and then everybody being annoyed by how much you play? Or the mission is to just make whatever room you're in, lifting it up. You know, it doesn't matter what kind of music, it doesn't matter what kind of band, it doesn't matter if it's a film score, a TV score, or if it's a jazz album or a rock album. Are you helping? You know, how much are you helping the situation? Are you playing in detriment of the music, or are you making it better? You know, and Ringo and both Dennis and Vinny and all those guys, you know, I think you know, they just made the music better. I wonder what Dennis would sound like, you know, if he was playing with the Beatles, or what Ringo would sound like if he was playing with John Scofield or with John McLaughlin. But, you know, that's why they said Ringo was the perfect drummer for the Beatles, you know. And when I saw Get Back, that, you know, 3-part documentary, it was super long and incredible, interesting, you know, just how they would come up with the tunes in the studio and how they were writing Get Back in real time. And then they play on the roof, and Ringo sounds great, you know, and he puts towels on the drums and he's got a vibe, you know, it's a sound. And as a band, they sounded so good, you know. And then, of course, you see, you know, Dennis and Steve Gadd and all those guys. Steve's a great example because he's got chops, but he's one of the most, you know, he underuses what he can do, you know, to the extent that you'll be like, man, he could totally play more and get away with it and still be musical. But I think his mission is like, how can I play the minimum necessary for this to be killing, you know? And he has the perfect formula because it is killing. Sometimes when I see him, I want him to go a little bit further because that's the kind of drummer I am. I'm very, you know, there's a fine line between being supportive And I'm trying to find the two words that really express this. You can be, you can propose, you know, or you can impose. So it's a very fine line because you're playing with the band and you can propose ideas in real time, of course. And with the piano player, he's doing his solo. And then, you know, I propose and maybe we can go there, you know. And if he catches, if what I'm doing, if what I'm proposing catches his ear and catches the band's ear, boom, all of a sudden we go into a different place. And maybe they don't. And then, okay, I lean back and then I wait. But there are instances where you're like, okay, there's nothing happening. Nothing interesting is happening right now. And so maybe I'll impose my will a little bit just to make something happen, even if it's not the most musical thing, but for something to happen. And that especially happens when you're playing with less mature players. Usually with very experienced players, it's hard for nothing to happen. You know, there's usually something interesting happening. But yeah, it's a fine line between proposing ideas and then imposing your will. Like, oh no, we're gonna go here. And it's a fine balance because as a drummer, you have a lot of power. It's very easy to impose yourself. And I'm always trying to walk that tightrope between imposing and just proposing and really kind of trying to let the music dictate where I'm supposed to go versus me dictating where the music is supposed to go.
Yeah, and how players draw that boundary is kind of like a fingerprint, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And you know, some drummers are very busy and non-musical. Some drummers are very busy and musical. Some drummers are not at all busy and musical. Some drummers are not very busy and not musical either. You know, it's always a balancing act, and that's what makes it fascinating, I think.
Totally. Well, another thing I wanted to pick your brain about was your use of ostinatos, because in my mind, I've been practicing a bunch of ostinatos recently. And by that, I mean having something fixed that doesn't change, whether that's a snare beat that occurs in the same place every 2 bars, whether that's a pattern with the feet. But obviously, in my mind, you're kind of the godfather of the crazy foot ostinato in odd meters and being able to play with absolute freedom over that. But the question I have about it, because I've been toying with this in my own mind, is do you think there's a utility to practicing that sort of stuff, even if you might not use it directly in a musical application? And if so, how do you think about it?
Oh, absolutely. I think everything is cumulative. You know, you can practice all kinds of crazy stuff. And even if you don't use it on the gig, it's just going to give you facility. You know, it's just really literally makes your synapses grow stronger and allow you to do different things that maybe you're hearing something. And if you don't have that facility, that, you know, that practicing behind you, then you might hear it and you might not be able to execute. So I think the good thing about doing those things is that it just gives your brain a little bit more mobility, more flexibility. Like for example, nowadays I'm not playing like, you know, claves in 7 that much, you know, to be honest, or compound claves or that kind of stuff. I'm playing just different kinds of music, but I'm sure all of that translates into me being able to do certain things that I hear in my head, thanks to all that work that I put in at some point in my life.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good point to ask. What motivated you to keep going through all that tremendous work you put in? Because drums are hard. And there's, for me at least, there's a big dip between, ooh, I can play a rock beat, and 25 years later, I feel like I have something valid to say on the instrument. So I'm always interested with good players. What kept them going? What was the North Star to keep you going through all of the rough parts?
It's just, you know, sometimes you're up for a challenge during a certain time of in your life. And I remember when I was at Berkeley, I was 21, and I got very humiliated on my first semester by thinking that I was great. I was not that great. I mean, I had chops, but I had no idea about anything that had to do with the jazz language, history, vocabulary. But here I came, to Berkeley with a little bit of chest pounding, like, oh, you guys are gonna see what I can do. And I remember there was an ensemble with Ron Savage, one of my great drum teachers, and this was my first semester, and he saw me walking around the hallways, and he asked me, "Hey man, you play drums?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course," because he saw me with my stick back, and then he invited me to play in this 8th semester bebop ensemble, and I was first semester right in the beginning, and I was like, oh my god, this is great, because now this chance that I have right now to show them, what I can do, maybe will save me 7 semesters. They're gonna skip me all the way to the last semester and graduate me with honors. That's how lost I was, to be honest. And we started the ensemble, and it was an ass whooping from the get-go, because I didn't know the language. I had a like huge rock kid, and he started dismantling my kid as I was playing. And he just left me with a hi-hat, snare drum, bass drum, and ride cymbal. And it was basically to show me, that to make music, that's all you need. You don't need all. Yeah, I had 7 cymbals and 2 hi-hats and a double bass drum pedal. Which, if you know how to use all that stuff, great. But at that point, it was just me about all the stuff that I knew how to do was based on that kit, on that configuration. All my licks and all my combinations and all the chops I had were just dependent on this particular setup. And once he took it away, I couldn't do anything. So that was a huge learning experience. It was one of the worst days of my life, but it was also one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it really opened my eyes to, like, okay, I need to really shed and to listen. I need to listen to this kind of music. I just don't know much about how this is played. So I started with kind of blue and all those classic Miles Davis records and Charlie Parker. But then when I heard My Funny Valentine 4 and More live at Town Hall with Tony Williams at 17, and I heard that band with George Coleman, Herbie Hancock, and Ron Carter, and Miles, of course. That was like when I first heard Rush or the Police. I was like, "What the fuck is this, man? This is crazy. I don't understand it, but I love it." Or the Chicory Electric Band. That kind of feeling. Like, I know how. I want to know how to do this. I want to understand what they're doing, and I want to learn how to do it. So it was a hard time, because I realized that I knew very little, and it really brought my ego down. But I was so hungry to learn, and I had already done enough work with my hands and my feet that I just started going upwards very, 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 very quickly. And it's like working out. If you work out for a year and you see absolutely no change in your body, that's going to discourage you. But I saw change in my playing very, very, very quickly. And I was so open to just getting it and playing with people that would kick my ass and just doing it right. I mean, I remember because I had my Yamaha Power V Special, like 22-inch kick with no front head, power toms, and super shiny cymbals. I had my K Custom, beautiful cymbal, but like, it's not a jazz kit. And then I was taking all these jazz ensembles, and people at that time you had to bring your own kit. And I remember all the teachers seeing me arrive with that thing, and they would roll their eyes like, "Oh no, this dude again," And so I started borrowing, jazzy cymbals from my friends, so that I wouldn't get vibes from the teacher. And then I got rid of my kit. Well, I still had it, but I bought a tiny Remo bebop kit, and I really wanted to do things right. And that was the time where I wanted to do jazz right, and I wanted to do Afro-Cuban music right, and I wanted to do Brazilian music right, and I wanted to do everything right. So it was a lot of practicing, a lot of studying, and like I said, I was at a point in my life where my playing just kind of took off. I don't know if I would have that in me right now, but
Mhm.
at 21, I definitely had it in me.
I thought about this too, and the word I used to describe it is the cave, but I suppose another metaphor would be the bridge, like Sonny Rollins. But I was thinking about this because over the winter, like I had a cave of my own where I just, I had put out a video and, had been getting some negative feedback on it. And I know it's not super healthy to take other people's feedback, but it mirrored some negative feelings I had. And then comparing that to the level that I wanted to be at, like made me angry. So I just, retreated into this kind of cave. And so I called it a rage cave. But I think there are other types of caves. There's like the love cave where somebody is just inspired by falling in love anew with the drums, every single day. But I think like there's something particular to jazz school where there's a unique kind of hard knocks that I think like Whiplash captured, if not the storyline, like the feeling that people who have gone through jazz school have in common. But I'm curious, between that experience at Berklee and when I started seeing you, for instance, at the Jazz Gallery with Miguel Zenon, and like on the record Hibaro, which I listened to so much that I basically wore out. Like I practically have every note of that record memorized. Like, yeah, how many years was that from Berklee to there? And like, what was happening in those intervening years?
I mean, I was at Berkeley for 4.5 years because I was trying to stretch my student visa as much as I could as a Mexican citizen and student. It was, back then, thank God, you could still stretch your visa and do part-time for a few years. Now that's impossible. As soon as you're done, I think they allow you maybe one semester, but as soon as you're done, I mean, maybe you can do your practical training and then out. And of course, it's going to get worse. Everything's going to get worse. Everything has already gotten worse. But back then, I was able to stretch it. I did 4.5 years, and then I stayed in Boston for 2.5 years. No, 2 years more, so 6.5 total. Because towards the end, I was, I had made good friends with Miguel, who was already like an incredible level as a composer and as a player. So I remember I played his senior recital, and I was with a nice crew already that really knew how to play, and I was playing with a bunch of teachers outside of school, and then Danilo Perez lives in Boston still. He was around, and he heard me, and then I started studying with him right after Berklee. Just because I forgot to apply for my practical training. So all of a sudden I was in this pickle where I was like, oh my God, I have nowhere to go and I'm done with school. So luckily at that moment, NEC, New England Conservatory, came through and they said, we can offer you basically a full ride to come and do a graduate diploma. And I could take lessons from 2 private teachers, and I had been taking private lessons from drummers my whole life. So I was like, I would love to take a private lesson with non-drummers and see what non-drummers have to tell me about my drumming. So one of them was George Garzone, and the other one was Danilo. So it was one of the greatest things I could have done because, for example, with George, I would just play standards and he would take it out into the stratosphere, and we would just play duo. So I had to keep the form in my head. It made me really strong to play for a year like that every week, just the way George plays, and me trying. Okay, we're playing All the Things You Are, which I know so well, but I'm not sure if we're playing All the Things You Are because the way he's playing. But I was like, no, I have to keep the form in my head. And then boom, I would hit a big one in the beginning of the form, and then I would hear George right there. So it was a great learning experience. Another thing that happened with George is that because I was always asking him, what do you think? You know, what would you want from me if we were in a professional situation? And he said, there's something about your right cymbal that is just not quite there. And I started working on it with Ron Savage and just how you would hold the stick very lightly and kind of have the cymbal spit out your stick, instead of leading into the cymbal. And I started trying all these techniques, and then without saying anything, I came back to my lesson with George and we started playing. And then I didn't say anything. And he said, I don't know what you did, but your right cymbal is like 10 times better. So those kinds of things were super useful. And then when I started taking lessons with Danilo, I came with the evil plan of learning all his music and then pretending I didn't really, know it. But then I would be like, "Hey, Danilo, how does this tune of yours goes? Panamonk." And like, you know it. I'm like, "Yeah, kind of." Okay, let's play it a little bit, and then he started playing it, and I knew it perfectly. So I was like, "Oh, cool!" So maybe bring in a bass player next time, and then we play. And without him knowing it, he started basically training me for his gig at NEC. And then when I think Jeff Ballard was playing with drums with them at the time, there was one time where he couldn't do a couple of gigs in France, and I was at the right moment at the right time, and I was prepared already. And he said, "Oh, you could do it. Why don't you come to France to Paris and do a couple of gigs?" And I was like, "Yes, of course." And that was right after Berkeley. And then he also recommended me for Paquito de Rivera and the United Nations Orchestra. So that was my way in. So to answer your question, at the end of my Berkeley stay, I was already connected with Danilo, with Paquito de Rivera, with Miguel, with David Sanchez. And I moved to New York in '99, not because I was touring all the time from Boston, so it's not like I felt like I needed to be in New York, but I had this very a terrible relationship with this girl, and we broke up. And then finally I was like, okay, I have nothing to be doing in Boston anymore. And then I moved to New York in '99, and then I started getting more connected, and that Pat Metheny heard me with Danilo, and it's like a snowball effect after you're at that level, I think.
Amazing. Well, like 45 minutes have flown by like it's been 5 minutes. So this has been very, very cool. I want to thank you for your time. Last question. Something I ask a decent amount is, say you have a young drummer that's 16, 17 years old, pre-college, sees what you're doing, is inspired by that, say has like a medium ability. Is there one piece of advice you would give to those folks in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I encounter those kinds of kids a lot of times that, when I do jazz workshops and clinics and stuff like that. And they always ask me how, what can I do to get better? And I always tell them the same thing, because during the clinic, we already spoke about motivic development, about playing with dynamics, about playing to a metronome, about leaving space, about call and response, about tension and release, about all these incredibly important things that music is built on. So I tell them, when you're practicing, practice stuff that you are going to use. So if you are a jazz drummer, what do you need if you're a jazz drummer, a modern jazz drummer? You need to know standards. That goes without saying. So you have to learn a bunch of standards. So you're gonna need to know how to trade eighths, fours, 16s, solo over the whole form. Those things you're gonna have to know. So practice it. Practice it. Play all the things you are. Sing the melody in your head, and then start trading eights with yourself, and record yourself, and do it to a click, and do it in a musical way. Do motivic development at the same time. Try to leave space. All the things at the same time, because if you're just practicing drumistic stuff in your practice room, and then you go to the gig, and then all of a sudden you have to play standards and trade and all this stuff, you're going to sound very mechanical. So that's why you can do all those things ahead of time. so that when you're actually doing it, it's not going to be such a different from your everyday practice. And I started noticing that because I was practicing all this crazy independent stuff, and which was fun and was challenging. But then I would be like a deer caught in the headlights at the gig, because I'm like, okay, let's play this standard. Like, oh, I don't know that one. Oh, and I don't know that one either. And you're insecure soloing over the form, and the vocabulary, the language that you're using, all that stuff. It's just the best way to go about it is to just try to approach it like it's a gig, and there's people there, and think of yourself as you're playing in a nice hall with your heroes, and at that level of commitment and concentration. Otherwise, you're going to get to the gig, and I think you're going to feel insecure.
Well, perfect note to end on, I think. Where would you send people to look up what you've got going on?
Well, my website has usually the most information, antoniosanchez.net. Then I'm all the platforms. TikTok I don't use it so much, even though I'm there, but I kind of like, it's a little hard to get in there nowadays. But yeah, Instagram, Antonio Drums 1, I think. Facebook, Antonio Drums X. I post the same thing on pretty much across every platform. So yeah, and I'm doing a bunch of touring with Bella Flick and Edmar coming up in September around the Northeast. And then I'm working on my next album. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be, but this fall I need to finish an album, either the music for an album or the album itself. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be. I did this project a year and a half ago with just playing duos, a couple of duos with Bella Fleck, a couple of duos with John Scofield, a couple of duos with Bill Frisell, a couple of duos with Chris Potter, and a couple of duos with Joel Ross. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. I have to say that was definitely the next thing. And then Trump got reelected, and it's very hard for me to just kind of like put a record of nice music out at this point. I feel like I have to acknowledge the moment in some shape or form. I'm still not sure how to do it, but I'm working on it. So hopefully you'll see that, hear that music next year.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for your time. Glad we were able to make it happen. I will ping you before we post this episode, but great finally catching up and getting to have this convo.
Definitely. Thanks, Nate. Pleasure, man.
All right. Take care. Have a good one.